Hey everyone, welcome to Urgent Care Management Monthly. Dr. Tim Reynolds here, and with me today I have our famous HR director and paralegal, Nila Smith. Hi Nila.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I think we've met before.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit today about commercial leases. I know for a lot of people out there, they've never leased anything before. So this is like the first time, so we got to kind of get down to the beginner stage. We may have to explain things, so if we start talking up here, bring me back down.
Okay.
Because a lot of the docs out there who are renting or leasing buildings for the first time, they've never leased anything. So we're going to kind of try and speak in a language they'll maybe understand. There's really, if we're talking about leasing a space, really we talk about residential leasing like you do with an apartment, right?
Right.
Or commercial leasing, which is what they're doing with the urgent care. So kind of tell me the difference between those two things.
Well, with a commercial lease, there are no caps on the deposits. There are longer terms, so it's more binding than what a residential lease is.
When you say no caps, what does that mean?
No caps on the deposit amount.
So you can
Security
charge,
deposit.
the security can be whatever it wants
Exactly.
to be. Okay.
And there's, as a residential lease goes, the consumer protection laws protects the residentials, where it does not protect on a commercial lease.
So that means if you're the tenant, you better be a little more careful.
Exactly.
So you gotta know kind of what you're doing. Okay.
Right.
So what are some of the things maybe you should think about or look at or consider before you rent a space?
One of the most important things that I think would be future growth. If you're planning on expanding, do you have enough room to expand where you're going to be leasing? Another thing is, I would look at the history of the landlord. That's very key in, he may be a bad landlord. You need to know if he's going to be local, if he's going to be out of town.
That's true.
And a few other things would be the sign requirements, the zoning.
Okay.
Those are all key elements.
Yeah, we've run into the sign problem before. So we leased a
Exactly.
space, and once we got there, then we realized, oh crap, our sign can only be this size or can only be this high or something like that, and we didn't realize that until afterwards. So
Exactly.
we made that mistake. The other mistake we made, you weren't around with us at the time, but our very first urgent care clinic, we built that building, and so it wasn't a lease, but one of the things we didn't realize is that area was not zoned for a curb cut. So where our original building is, there was supposed to be no curb cut there. And it took us, it was a lot of work to get that. So I think knowing the zoning laws for the signs, et cetera,
Right,
can
and there
come
are
back and bite you.
even the business licenses. That's very key
Yeah.
also.
What business license you need in order to practice there.
Exactly.
So while we're on that subject, we weren't really planning to talk about this, but let's explain just a little bit about, a lot of people don't know what zoning means. Residential zoning, commercial zoning, medical zoning. Can you kind of explain that? So if somebody's looking for a building, they know what they're looking for.
Well, different buildings are zoned for different types of facilities, and you have to make sure that within the city that the zoning is for a medical
For a
facility.
medical facility, because you
Exactly.
can get in trouble otherwise not knowing that that's what
Right.
they do. Good,
Right.
good. All right, so let's talk about, now usually when they talk about leasing something, it gets very confusing, even to those of us who've done it a little bit, because there's gross leasing, there's net leasing, then you hear the word triple net lease, and then there's also, a lot of times it's leased by square foot, right?
Right.
Or it could just be the whole thing. Can you just kind of explain how all that works?
Well, with the gross, it includes like the utilities, the insurance, taxes, and a net lease would not include that. That's the same as the triple.
Okay, so basically a gross, if somebody comes to me and says, you're gonna have a gross lease, that's how much I pay per month, period.
Exactly.
Right, that's a gross lease.
Right.
Where a triple net or a net lease basically is, I'm gonna pay my rent to the landlord, but then I'm also responsible for the taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance of the common
Right.
areas.
What it's called is CAM, Common Area
To
Maintenance.
explain what a common area is, some people have
Common
never
area-
leased, people might not know
A
that.
common area is like a parking lot, lighting outside.
Right,
I mean, you may be responsible for putting, for paving
right.
outside of your building.
So if it's a single building, you're leasing that building like we do in Longview,
Right.
obviously we're responsible for that whole thing.
Exactly.
But if you happen to be in a strip center where you have other tenants, then you're responsible for part of that.
Right.
Right.
Even the shrubs and the
Right. Landscaping, all of those kinds of things. Yeah.
Right.
I think people can get in trouble with that because as you know, I lease commercial buildings as well as lease a tenant, and I lease them to other people at the same time. And I think people get in trouble because they don't understand what a net lease is. And so when they get in it, then at the end of the year, they get another bill saying, here's how much it was for your insurance and your common area maintenance
Right.
over what we predicted, and they may not have realized they were responsible for that when they get into it. So
Exactly,
it's
and it can
important
be
for people.
quite a shock, especially if you've just paid taxes, income taxes, and then
Right.
here comes
And
another
now here
bill.
comes another bill for the other
Exactly.
taxes, so I think that's important for people. All right, so the next question on here is, what types of things should be included in a commercial lease? What kind of things do you look for if you're the tenant?
If you're the tenant, you have to look long range. If something happens to your business and it does not make it, do you have a right to sublease?
Okay.
That's very, very important.
So someone who's never done this before needs to understand, if for some reason your business doesn't make it, you're still responsible for the lease
Exactly.
to the end of the lease period.
Exactly.
I think some people think, well, my business goes out, I'll just walk away. That's
Mhm.
not as easy to do as that, right?
Right,
Okay.
right.
All right, so subleasing would be a huge thing for them.
Right, and when is your entitlement date? When can you move in?
Okay.
When is your entitlement of possession is how the term is.
Okay. All right, good. And when you're talking about, so entitlement means that's the date I'm allowed to move in, that's the day the lease term starts, right?
Exactly.
And how long is a lease for?
A lease could be anywhere from 5, 10 years. When you're looking at commercial leases, they're a lot longer than the residential leases.
Right.
So there again, you're signing a document that it's going to be very binding.
So if I'm the tenant, do I want a short lease or do I want a long lease? It's a trick question.
That is a good question, and I really couldn't give you an answer on
Yeah.
that.
I think, and here's what we've learned. If I'm the landlord, I want a long-term lease.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm the tenant, it depends. What I would really like to do is have a short-term lease with a lot of options. So if I can get a 5-year lease with 2 5-year options, then at the end of 5 years, it's my choice as to if I want to exercise those options.
Why I said that is because the amount of the payment could differ.
Right.
It could, on the long term,
Right.
it could be less. On
Right.
the short term, it
And-
could be more.
And
so it's what
yeah,
you're
so
looking
there's
for.
no great answer.
Right.
The thing that's worked best for us is try and get it shorter with some options going along. And in the option, you can specify how much the rent will be in the option as well.
Exactly.
So, all right, good. What should we look for before we sign a commercial lease?
I would definitely know the terms of as far as when it terminates and if a notice has to be given. Another thing is if you have to pay a percentage of your profits, that could easily happen also. It's when reading between the lines, make sure that you understand your lease
That
totally.
you know exactly what your payments are going to be, and that doesn't
Exactly.
include a quote.
Who's going to pay the repairs of the building? Air conditioning and heating can be quite expensive, so I would definitely.
And all of this is clear. It's good for everybody to understand. If you've never done this before, all of this is negotiable.
Exactly.
What looks like happens when you're presented with a commercial lease, if you've never seen one before, is it looks like that's just the way it is, either yes or no.
Yes.
And what we've learned over the years is everything in a commercial lease is negotiable.
Exactly.
And I've negotiated literally everything, both from the leaser side and the leasee side. You can negotiate which things are, like, for example, going back to Longview, we negotiated that the common, what's it called, the common things that break all the time, air conditioning, et cetera, we would be responsible for. But if it was core things in the building, plumbing, etc., the landlord would be responsible for that. Here's the difficulty. When something breaks, he then gets to argue that this is a common thing, and we get to argue that this is a permanent thing. So I think you have to be very clear in what you're
Right.
going to
I
pay
mean,
for.
it could even include the roof repairs.
Roof repairs, exactly.
It's another item that you don't want to leave out.
Yeah, and things do happen. I mean, we had a flood, and it was very questionable who should be responsible for the flood damage. Was it the person who built the building, or was it the tenant? So
And with all the storms going on, the hail damage for the year.
and hail damage.
That's-
So I think you're right. You got to be pretty good. What else do you want to look for?
Well, I would, not only with the repairs, but is the build out. Build out, if you have it to your specifications.
Right.
Who's going to be responsible for the cost of the build out? Most of the time it's the landlord. That's why he likes to get you in a long-term lease, and it's really binding, and he will make sure that you stick with your lease and you do not break it.
Yeah.
Because if he's going to be putting all this money out to do it to your specifications.
Right. I think, yeah, and part of it has to do with the real estate market in your area. In some real estate markets, certainly 10 years ago, landlords were not doing build outs because there was less space than there were tenants. Now, there's a lot more space than there are tenants. Now, landlords are doing a lot more to try and get people in their buildings. They're willing to do the build out, they're willing to give you 3 months free rent, et cetera, et cetera. And I speak from both sides of that equation. So I think you have to know sort of what is this, a buyer's market or a seller's market or a leasee's market or a leaseor's market in your area as to what, and we've negotiated everything on that as to who's going to be responsible, who gets to choose the contractor, who gets to choose the subcontractors, what specifications will it be to. At the end of the day, it is his building,
That's true.
right? But you're the one with the lease, so and one of the things I'll add, you mentioned, you said, what's the history of the landlord? One of the things I would say is, how considerate is he or she in negotiating? And how considerate they are is going to tell you a lot about what your relationship's going to be later on.
Exactly.
So.
It's hard when I owned a company at one time where the landlord was in New York. It's very difficult
Yeah, I agree with that.
negotiate, especially when something breaks.
Yeah, yeah, and then you can't get hold of them, and so I agree.
Exactly.
What's a reasonable commercial lease? What's reasonable for the landlord to put in there?
Oh, well, in case you do break it, the terms of the lease, it's very reasonable for him to put in there that you will be responsible for any legal expenses.
Right.
And the courts uphold that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, we've had no problems with that. Besides the person signing the lease, who else needs to look at it?
Well, if you have a partner, make sure that they're aware of all the terms of the lease ahead of time, and especially your attorney.
Yeah, and I would say even more specifically your real estate attorney.
Exactly.
Because every attorney thinks they know leases, and my experience is if you have a general attorney do your lease, later on a real estate attorney is going to look at it and say, who the heck did you have do this lease? And
Exactly.
so they're expensive, but I think there's some things you shouldn't skimp on. You need to have a real estate attorney check out your lease.
Absolutely.
Good.
But not only that, your attorney's good for negotiating on the lease. If
They
you're
are.
not good at negotiating,
They'll help you out.
they will help you.
Any other bits of advice for those out looking for their first lease?
None that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I would tell them good luck, and make sure you get the right people involved. If you haven't done it before, this isn't one of those things you want to skimp on.
Exactly, because the contracts are very binding.
So I agree. All right, thanks now.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.